Hello and welcome back to part 3 in my series about how to combine the MVVM structure with networking. In our case, or the first case here, it will be sockets. So this is actually my third attempt because I bungled the first one. I wasn't happy with the second, so let's see how it goes this time around. But in part 2 we introduced the class diagram for an example, the uppercase, and in this part we're going to implement that. So here we have the overview of the system. I know it's a bit small, but I have the core part and the view and the model, and I have most of this in place. I just need to make a few modifications, so hopefully I don't need to touch the view part here. My model, I need to take some of that responsibility and move it to the server model, because currently in my local version this is where all the conversion and log management happens, and I want that on the server side now. And then we need the client server communication here. I also want it so that I can connect multiple clients, and the clients can simultaneously request uppercase conversions, and when one client does it, that creates a new log entry, and I want all clients to be notified about that log entry. So I have 3 types of behavior in my system. I have that I can request a uppercase conversion, so that goes to the server and I get a response back again. I have that once we open the log view for the first time, I will request all existing log entries on the server and send it back again. And then the third part is that whenever one client requests an uppercase, that creates a new log entry, and I want that new log entry to be pushed to all my connected clients. So that's sort of a broadcast notification. Alright, so we're going to see 3 types of behavior grouped into 2 types of approaches. So the first one here is what we might call a request response, and it looks like we're just calling a method on the server side. So that means the client is pulling data from the server side, and that the first one is I want to request an uppercase conversion, so I pull the uppercase conversion data from the server side, and the other one is that the client pulls the entire log. The other approach here is a push, so that's something initiated by the server, and the server pushes data to the clients. So this is something that the clients do not necessarily expect to happen. Well, they expect it to happen, but they don't know when it happens. So it means the clients must be ready to receive this push notification at all times. And this is when a new log entry goes into the log on the server side. So these are the behaviors that we were going to implement, and I have sort of planned it out, but I haven't programmed it yet, so we're going to wing it, and hopefully it'll turn out okay. So let's get to it. And let me just find my IntelliJ. So I have my class diagram open. Right, it's slightly bigger, and I have most of the top part here. I hopefully don't need to touch the green part at all. I need to modify my model a bit. We'll do the client side first, so that's the pink box here, my pink package. I'll modify the model a little bit, and then I will add the yellow part here, the networking for the client. I'm going to need a client factory, which may seem a bit overkill, because when we do sockets I just have the one client here. I could have multiple interfaces, but when we do remote method invocation later on, then it's highly likely that I will have multiple client classes, and so the client factory will make more sense and be able to provide multiple types of clients, similar to the view model factory can provide multiple types of view models, and the model factory can provide multiple types of models. Again, I just have one model, but I could have more models here. I could have a converter model and a log model, for example. I don't know. And then on the server side we're going to do this, but I will start with the client side. So let's start down here. Currently I have planned that my socket handler on the client side is an internal class. It could be its own class, but this arrow here indicates that it's an internal class in the socket client, and I think I will actually make it an anonymous implementation, because this is the one that's responsible for the third case. Blah blah blah. Right, about the receiving push notifications. So the only responsibility of that class here is just to listen for notifications coming from the server. In case you're doing a chat system, that could be a notification of a new chat message, or it could be a notification that a new user has connected. So we'll do that inside the chat client, socket client, sorry. Okay, let's open IntelliJ here. I have created a new, so all of this is on GitHub, and at the time of making this video, I do have another program here. That's the other version that I wasn't happy with, so I'm going to override that. I'm just going to copy everything from my local version over here. So I do suggest that if you're not entirely familiar with how my local version is currently working, then you pause the video and look up on GitHub how it's put together. Okay, so it's still just a local version, so I just need to organize it. I will do my package. I create a client package. I want a server package, and I want a shared package, just to group things. Right, core, model, util, no, not util, views, and all this will go into the client. So the util packet goes into the shared, because that's going to be needed on both the client and the server. My util contains the subject. I also need a package for my transfer objects. So those are the objects that will be sent back and forth between client and server. I don't want it inside the util package, I want it here. So now I have a util and a transfer object. Let me just close that. Okay, so we'll start with the client. I need a networking package. And in here we create the client interface. And my client interface must have the functionality of to uppercase something, string, and also return a list of log entries. I need to make sure that I'm using the right one. Get log. So now I have duplicate classes, right? I have my log entry here in the model, one log entry, but I also have a log entry up here, so I need to be careful about importing the right one. I think while I remember it, I also need to modify my fxml files, because this one is currently referencing the controller from the other example. So I need to go socket uppercase dot client like that. So now that should be the correct one. I need to do that with the other one as well. We say socket dot client. Okay, so that should be okay. All right, so not that one. Oh, while I do have the log entry open, I'm going to send this across the network, so it needs to implement serializable. There we go. Okay, so back to my client. This one must be able to send out notifications, so I need to make it into a subject. Whenever we receive a notification or some data from the server, the client should send out a notification so that the model can react to it. Right, I need to create my client class, so I call it socket client, and this one needs to implement the client interface. Yeah, and I want to implement those. Okay, so the constructor here, I need a public client, and I'm not sure it should socket client like that. I don't think I will put anything in it currently. So I like to use the constructor to just set things up, take arguments and assign them to field variables, and then have a separate method to actually execute functionality. And here we just have a method to start client. Alright, and the start client here, I should create a connection to the server. So I create a new socket, and in my case it's just localhost. I used port 2910. And Atelier seems to be stuck. That's wonderful. Oh, there we go. I need to surround this with a Trycatch. I use the Control-Alt-T for the surround with. Now, usually I would send a message to the user of the system, or we could wait 5 seconds and try again or something like that, but I'll leave that out for now. So I just print out if something goes wrong. So I have my socket, and I need to create my streams. Right, I need an object output stream, out to server, like that, and the socket get output stream, and we need an input stream object, input stream in from server. Like that. And then I want to have a new thread. Nope, not like that. New thread. And this one should just listen to server. So I create a method here. This is what I will do in that thread, and then we start the thread. Start. So the responsibility of this thread is to listen for incoming data from the server. So that's when the server pushes data to me. And what do I want to do here? I want to do this slightly different. So we do it with a lambda expression instead. Listen to server, because I want to send those along like that. Okay, so I need to have a while true, and we want to read something from the server. Read object. Oh. And this is where I need to surround with the Trycatch again. I will just collapse these. So I need to actually read some kind of object from the server. So I'll have to define what is that I want to send back and forth, and that's my transfer object. And I want to send what I call a request class. This is just my approach. It must implement the serializable. Now there are different ways of doing this, but I've gotten used to having this type of request class. So I have a private string type, and I have a private object argument, and I need a constructor for this. So instead of the string type, if you have seen my video about sockets and enums, you should probably use an enum here, but I'm using a string in case you haven't seen that video, so you don't have to be too confused. And then I need get methods, so I can get them both out again. So this is what I'm sending back and forth. And I also want the log entry that doesn't belong on the client side anymore, that belongs down here, because I'll be using that on both the client and the server side. So I just put it in this shared folder. Okay, so my client here will read a request like that. Okay, so I got interrupted by an incoming Skype call, and then I paused the video and I continued the video, and the rest of the video apparently didn't have any voiceover. So I'm trying again. I think I have removed everything back to the current state I was in when I was here. I completed the entire example, but then we have to go back. So I got to this point here. Sorry about any potential confusion. So I'm receiving a request from my server, right? And this is my request class. It implements serializable, and there's a request type, and this is where you would use enums if you have seen that video. If you haven't, then you can just use a string. So that's what I'm doing, so you don't get too confused. And then I have an object here, which is what I actually want to send back and forth. So whenever I receive something, this is the push notification from the server. Whenever I receive something, I just want to say that I have received whatever, right? And we want to forward that request to whoever is listening, which in my case is the model. File property changed, and there's no old value. So I just give it the type of the request. I give it null for the old value, and I send the argument for the new value here. And then my model should listen to this. So let's just check that I have that in my model. I should have checked whether I have actually changed my model accordingly already, or whether that was the next step of the video. I think that was the next step of the video. So great. Yeah. Okay. So I have part of my client. Let's just make it so that my model is listening to this part here. So that means my model needs to know about the client, and it does that through the client factory. The client factory will provide a client to the model, right? Client here. So I have my client factory already implemented. It's just like a TV kitchen show. My client factory, it can just return a client of the type of interface here. At some point in the future, you will learn about remote method invocation, and if you then want to swap out your networking layer with IMI instead of sockets, we can just create an IMI client instead, and the rest of your system will not know about it. So this is the only change we need to make. I need to go to the uppercase app and create my new client factory. I hand that factory over to the model factory, so now my model factory knows about it. And when I create the new model, my text converter manager, I give it the client. So now my text converter manager knows about a client. Just like my diagram says, the text converter manager should know about a client. I have my methods here. The two uppercase was previously containing functionality of converting to uppercase, but I want that to happen on the server side. So instead I just ask the client, could you uppercase this text for me? Similarly for the log, I don't have the list of logs in my text converter manager anymore. I want to fetch those from the server, so I ask the client to get those for me. And then we want to listen to events. So sometimes a new log entry is pushed to my client, and I want to listen for that event. So whenever the new log entry event is being fired from the client, this method here is called, and I don't want to do anything in my model. I'm just forwarding that event to my view model. I could do something with the event, but in this case I don't need to do anything. So let's check out the view model. I have made a modification here as well, so the view model is also listening to this event, and when it receives that event from the model, I call this method, and I just update the list of logs. And I get the new log entry and I put that in my list of logs, which I already have here. So that's it for updating it. Now back to my socket client. I also need to provide this functionality. I have these here, so whenever we add a listener, it's going into my support, and we can remove a listener. So here I want to create a new connection. So I have a connection up here that's dedicated to the listening part. And I forgot something here, because we want to say that I should add a listener to the server. So I want to write an object, and we give it a new request, and the type is listener, and there's no argument, so we just do it like that. So I'm sending this connection here is my listener connection. I need another connection for my request response down here. So I'll just copy that and we'll take it in a Trycatch. Okay, so I'm creating an input and output. I need to send a request to the server, out to server, write object, new request. I give it a request type and it is of uppercase. I give it an argument and that's the string. And then I expect to read a request back again. I just call it response here, response. And it's a request we receive, an in from server, read object. And I need to add something to the catch clause and I can just collapse them into one like that. If something goes wrong, the connection breaks or whatever, print out the stack trace and maybe I just want to return the same to indicate nothing happened. I should probably show an error message to the users so they actually know what went wrong. But that's for a future version. And then I return a string from my response, get argument, like that. Alright, so I create a connection, I send my request, I receive a response back again, and then I send that back to my model. Now for the other one I want to do something very similar. Again, surround with a Trycatch. And we send out to server, we send a request, new request of type fetch log, and there are no arguments for this. And then I get a request back again. I call it response again here, response. And we say in from server, read object, and I need to add a catch clause and I can just collapse them into one. And then I want to return whatever I received from the server side, response get argument, like that. Okay, and I just return null, or I could return an empty list if something goes wrong, or I can show a message to the user. Alright, so I have my two methods again, create a separate connection, make the streams, send a request, get a response, and send that response back to the model. Now I'm noticing I have a lot of overlapping functionality here, duplicate code. So I can highlight this part, Control-Alt-M. Cannot perform refactoring, that was not what I wanted. Let's try this one. So this part is actually the duplicating. So I just make a request method, I refactor that. That didn't go as planned. This part, it worked the last time I did it. Request, refactor. To uppercase. Oh. Okay, sorry, confusing myself. This part, request, refactor. Yes, accept signature change, blah, blah, blah. I want to replace that part also. So now my two methods here are a lot simpler and the duplicate functionality is just down here. And this one is the type. I'll just rename that to type. And this one is then the argument, like that. Okay, so I can reuse this method for future uses. Right? If I have a to lowercase, I can reuse that method. If I have it to random case, I can do it. Okay, so now I think my client is in place. I have my thread, which is listening for push notifications from the server, and I have my request response methods down here using separate connections. Alright, so just a status check. I think I have this layer in place. I have modified my model so it's listening and using the client. I have my client factory, so everything is put together here. And my log view model can listen to new log entries from here. So let's move on to the server side. I will start with the text manager. Let's see, collapsing this, collapsing client, share. Let me just make sure this one, that's the log entry. It implements serializable. Previously that was in the client model, but I'm using it both on the server and the client side. So that's just my data container. There's no functionality, it's just data. So the server will need a networking package, and it will also need a model package. And I'm pressing F6 to move the model package like that. So now they are, I could also go and say refactor and move. That will also move it. Okay, so my model, I need a text manager is an interface. Yeah, and it extends the subject from that one, yeah. And it has the functionality of returning a to uppercase string, and I can also return a list of log entry. Yeah, get log. Okay. Then I need an implementation of it. Text manager impl, and I want to make sure it's with a capital I there, and it must implement the text manager. I implement the methods from both the text manager interface and the subject like that. I want a constructor. I want a private property chain support, and also a list of log entries. Log entries. I initialize them down here. Support equals to a new one. I give it this as the source of the events. I create a new array list like that. Now my to uppercase, this is where I change it. So I have a result to uppercase. I also want to put that, I add a new log entry. So log entry new one, and it takes the input, which was the string from my argument up here, and it takes my result. I add that to the log entries, add log entry. I also want to fire an event, and we say new log entry. There's no old one, so just null and then the new one. So the idea is that my socket handler can listen to this and then push the notification. So this is my push notification, it originates here. And then I want to return the result. Down here for the log, I could just return the log entries, but I'm going to return a copy because I've tried this before and I have noticed some irregularities when sending lists across the object output and input streams. And if I send one list and then add something to it and send the list again, I will receive the old version of the list on the client side, so some strange behavior. So instead I'm going to create a duplicate, a copy. So I'm returning a new array list, and I can just give it my log entries, and that will create a copy of this one. All right, I want to be able to add a listener, yeah, with the event name and the listener like that, and I should also be able to remove it. Okay, so that's my model. Right, it's a subject, so we can listen to it. I can get the logs, and I can get a new result here, which will update the log. So let's go to the networking part. Server, networking. I will create my socket server first. Yeah. This one needs a public. I need a constructor. I need to know about the text manager. So let's do that first. Text manager. Text manager. I need a constructor, and I just set that. And then I want to keep a separate start server method. So again, I'm keeping my constructor simple. It's just initializing and setting stuff. Here we create a server socket. I call it welcome socket, and we create a new one. I want to listen to port 2910, like that. I need to surround it with a try-catch. Okay, and I need a while loop, while true, to just accept connections. So we say welcome socket, accept, and that gives me a socket. And then this is where I want to start a new thread. Start new thread, right? So that's the next class that we'll do. And in my diagram, so on the client side, I had an internal handler, which was actually just an anonymous implementation. Right? Let me just show you that. Client network, sorry, client. So this here is my anonymous implementation, right? And on the server side, so it's not really doing much. There's basically just 2 lines of relevant code, well, 5 lines. But on my server side, the handler should do a bit more, so I'm going to make it a separate class. So let's go on to move. So let's do that one. Networking, server, Java class, socket, handler. All right. It must implement runnable. I need to implement the method. I need a constructor, and I need some field variables. I need a private socket. I need to know about the text manager, like that. And I need a constructor, like this. And I need a object output stream, out to client, private object input stream, in from client. And I want to initialize those down here. Out to client is equal to new socket get output stream, like that. In from client equals to a new input stream, and we get that from the socket, like that. And I need to surround it with a try-catch, like that. Okay, so again, it's not very good error handling. I'm just printing out the error. You should never leave your catch clauses empty. So I at least want to show that something has happened, but the user doesn't know about that. So that should be, you would benefit from making better error handling. If you cannot create these, maybe you should try again later, or terminate it somehow, or I don't know. All right. So in the run method, this is where we read something, and we say, what do? We want to read something from the client, read object. I know it is of type request, like that. Request, and then we need to figure out what is that request. So if the request is of type listener, equals request.getType, right? And I should just surround everything with a try-catch, collapse it. So if it is of type listener, then I want to add it as a listener to the text manager. We want to listen to new log entry, and we want to create a method for that on new log entry. Yeah, let me just make sure this is what we are actually sending, new log entry. Oh. Right, so I'm using the same string. That's good. Okay, so so now this thread here is added as a listener to the text manager, and whenever we receive an event, I want to push that to the client. So we say out to client, write object, new request, and it is of type get property name, and it is of type we give the argument new value. So the get property name, that's this one. Okay, we surround with a try-catch, like that. Okay, So if my model notifies about events, then every client who has added itself as a listener will receive that event. Okay. Else, if it could also be an uppercase event equals request.get type, like that. Then I want to ask my text manager to convert to uppercase request get argument, and I cast this to be a string like that, and that returns a string to me, result. And I want to write a request back again, out to client, write object, new request, and it is of type uppercase, and I give it the result as the argument. Okay, so I receive a request from my client, and I receive a request, and if the request is of type uppercase, I tell my model to handle that, and then I send the result back again. The last one was if it was a fetch log event, I think. Let's just check again. Uppercase fetch log. So this is where you would use enum. So because if I had uppercase with a C here, my server would not recognize it. So the enums are easier to not mess up. Equals request dot get type. I could probably do a switch statement here instead. That would probably also be fine. Text manager get log and log, and I want to send something back to the client. It is no longer an uppercase, it is a fetch log with my log, like that. All right, and I think that's all for my socket handler. I can add it as a listener, I can respond to uppercase requests, and I can respond to fetch log requests. So let's put that together with the socket server. So instead of just having a comment, I want to start a new thread. It takes a new socket handler, and my socket handler needs to know about the socket and the text manager, and then I start it, and then we are ready to handle the next request. So some of these threads will be very short-lived because they will just read a request and then send something back again, and others of the threads will live a bit longer because they have added themselves as listeners. So I'm handling both the push notifications and the request response variations of it. All right, so a socket, that's all. Then I just need a main method to run this. Run server. Yeah, and public static void main, and I need a socket server, new one, and I need to give it a new text manager implementation, and then we start the server. Okay. I think that's it. My socket client is probably ready. Yeah, so next is to actually test if anything is running. That would be way above expectations, but let's see how it goes. It's just compiling. Let me just pause here. All right, my server is running, and all right, I have my client running. Let's see what happens. Hello. I actually get a response back. That's wonderful. That's wonderful. And I get another response back. So my request response setup is working. Let's check out the log. I actually have something in my log. That's even more amazing. Let us create another client to see if the push notifications are also working as expected. So if one client does something, I want to see that on the other client over here. And let me just start that. Yep. And also wonderful. And we submit, and that's actually working. And if I go to the log over here, also wonderful. Also wonderful. And I go back, and I'm super amazed, and hopefully we should actually see a live update over here. I submitted, and I'm super amazed, and I can also go and check I'm super amazed over here. So my program seems to be working as expected. Let me just shut everything down, and we are close to being done. Right, I have everything. My server and my client is now working as expected. I have what I set out to do, the request response, and I also have the push notifications so that my clients can listen to updates initiated on the server side. So I think I'm happy, and I think I will stop the video here. Thanks for watching.